The Lord be with you. Well, I feel like we're all kind of developing these stories from our time of pandemic. It kind of reminds me of like our grandparents or our great-grandparents who lived through like the Great Depression. And they just had these stories, right? These tales that you would ask them to tell because you don't understand what it was like. And they would have these incredibly vivid things, things that are sometimes humorous, things that are unimaginable, and you would just kind of hang on every word trying to imagine what it would have been like to live through a time such as that. I feel like we are going to lose that in a generation or two, that people aren't going to understand what it was like to go through the pandemic. So we all have these personal stories that we're probably going to tell. And I, for one, have a story from the pandemic that I would like to share with you today. Mine has to do with our bedtime routine for our youngest son. Now, he always has a bedtime routine, regardless of whether there's a pandemic or not. We did this for all of our kids. The idea is there's probably going to be some kind of stories that are read, some kind of songs that are sung, and a prayer that's offered. And the songs vary from night to night. Sometimes they're songs from his music class that he was a part of, Music for Tots. Sometimes they're nursery rhyme type songs. Sometimes they're the old children's Bible songs. And every once in a while, we sing a hymn or two, usually just the first line, and we do it by memory. But every once in a while, we actually break out the old hymnals on special occasions. And these are not like the hymnals that we have at Zion Church. These are actually old hymnals that we got from the church that my wife and I were married at. So while we were there in that community, they actually transferred from one hymnal style to another. So they picked a more updated hymnal with newer selections and newer arrangements. And when they did, they took all of their old hymnals and they piled them in boxes and they set them out for the next several Sundays and just allowed anybody who wanted to take some could take some. So we did, and our family took several because we put a few in our house, and we actually put a couple in each of our vehicles because, believe it or not, back in the day when we would travel a lot on the weekends, especially if it was on a Sunday and we weren't able to be in a house of worship, and we certainly weren't at our home church, we used to sing hymns in the car. So like one hymnal in the back seat, one in the front seat. Obviously the passenger would be the one reading the verses. Whoever was driving would either just have to do it by memory, or you'd get fed the line, to kind of start you and you'd fumble your way through. But that used to be one of the things that we did whenever we were traveling on a Sunday morning. If you couldn't find anything good on the radio, or you just kind of wanted the first 30 minutes to be a little bit more devotional, you would sing hymns that were from the hymnal of your church that you were a part of. Now, over time, obviously, as the kids got older and earbuds were invented, everybody just started listening to their own thing. So we don't keep the hymnals in our cars anymore, but just kind of love that practice. So from time to time now with our youngest, we will still break out a hymnal and we will sing songs. All of the verses, songs that aren't in the hymnal at our church right now, songs that maybe he's familiar with, at least the first line, but he's not used to hearing the other verses, maybe songs that he's never heard before. So I actually, I have one of the copies right here. As you can see, these were like all fallen apart, which is, again, why they were replacing them. And we've certainly used them over the years. This particular volume was Great Hymns of the Faith. And as we were singing to him that night, there were just some classics for me that I haven't sung in a long time. Songs like Victory in Jesus, Are You Washed in the Blood? When the roll is called up yonder. All of these are kind of peppy songs. All of these just have very simple lyrics to them, but are kind of centered in this hopeful victory message. And while we're singing these, typically I'll pick a couple at random. My wife will pick a couple. We don't consult, just do you have your two? Yep, I got mine too. Okay. Call out a page number and we just kind of sing through them. We're right in the middle of singing to our son. And I just got transported for a minute into kind of a Southern gospel church that we've got a family down south. It reminded me of being there with them. And I don't know if you've ever been a part of kind of a Southern gospel church. Beautiful people, people who are often dirt poor, people who have all sorts of problems and all sorts of internal dynamic issues. But on Sunday mornings, something's different. The pastor usually preaches something very simple. It's usually centered in salvation. And then sometimes, just sometimes, you experience something where somebody forgives somebody. Somebody gets overwhelmed by the good news of Jesus and receives it for the first time or the third time or the 23rd time, because that happens a lot. Maybe it's someone just got healed, someone just got a new job, and all of a sudden there's this excitement that breaks out. And when the songs are sung in that good old-fashioned, old-time gospel religion sort of way, it just, people get into it. There's clapping, there's hand raising, there's dancing in the aisle. And keep in mind, I've had a very ecumenical experience over the years with churches. I have been part of higher churches that follow kind of a strict liturgy and have seen great beauty and symmetry to that. I've also been part of what's typically called lower churches that are just kind of these Bible or non-denominational churches that just sort of focus on preaching and singing, and that's it. And I have found value in each one of the traditions that I've been in. But every once in a while, it's good to have one of those traditions feed you in a way that some of the others can't. So when we were singing these songs, these old gospel songs, it just kind of reminded me of that simple message of the power and the victory in Jesus. Now, there's actually a passage in the book of Acts, chapter 5, where we start to experience what that would have been like sort of for the early church. So you've got the apostles who have been arrested, so to speak, by the Sanhedrin for teaching in the name of Jesus, which they were not authorized to do. So they go out and they do it again, and they get arrested a second time. And as the council is meeting and trying to figure out what to do with them, one of their leaders, a guy named Gamaliel, stands up and says, we need to really weigh out what's going on here. If this is from man, then this movement is going to fail. And people will be forgotten, and it'll just all sort of disperse, and we don't really have a lot to be worried about. But if God is the one behind this Jesus movement, and we find ourselves fighting against him, we're going to lose. So the council takes that into consideration, and they end up just flogging the apostles and letting them go. And then it says at the end of chapter 5, the apostles left the Sanhedrin rejoicing because they had been counted worthy of suffering disgrace for the name. Day after day in the temple courts and from house to house, they never stopped teaching and proclaiming the good news that Jesus is the Christ or the Messiah. Sometimes just the simplicity of that message overcomes all obstacles, overcomes all hardships. It gives us hope. And I think we need that hope right now. I mean, we are torn in so many ways. We are torn societally with a lot of riots and a lot of protests going on right now. We are torn in our physical health and just sort of fear for our mortality. But we're also torn mentally and emotionally and spiritually. And we just need sometimes a good song. I often forget our faith is a singing faith. And we need those songs, even though as a lot of our churches are gathering back together again, we aren't going to be able to sing, or we haven't been able to sing. Don't let that stop you in private or even in your heart. Go back and review some of these powerful songs about the victory of Jesus and let them remind you that there is hope in all circumstances, whether you are oppressed, whether you are suffering physically or mentally or emotionally or spiritually. There is victory in Jesus, and there is hope in the songs that we sing. So that's one of my stories from the pandemic. And let me just say, in these times of our ongoing pandemic, the peace of God